In the annals of naval history, few names resonate with the raw power and enduring presence of the USS Iowa. She was more than a ship. She was a 45,000-ton declaration of American industrial might, a floating fortress born on the eve of global conflict. Her silhouette, dominated by 3 colossal turrets housing 9 16-inch guns, was the unmistakable profile of a predator. Each gun could hurl a shell the weight of a small car over 20 miles with terrifying accuracy. This was not merely a vessel, it was a projection of national will, a symbol of a nation awakening to its role as a global superpower. Commissioned in 1943, the Iowa-class battleships were the culmination of centuries of naval evolution, the ultimate expression of the gun-based warship. They were designed to be faster, more powerful, and better protected than any battleship ever built, capable of hunting down and destroying the enemy's finest, from the German Bismarck to the Japanese Yamato. As she slid into the waters of the New York Navy Yard, the world was ablaze. The United States, reeling from the attack on Pearl Harbor, was mobilizing its full strength for a war that spanned 2 oceans. The USS Iowa was not just an addition to the fleet, she was the tip of the spear, a weapon crafted for a singular purpose: to seek out and annihilate the naval power of the Axis. Her story is not just one of battles and bombardments, but of technological innovation, of the men who walked her decks, and of the pivotal moments in American history she witnessed firsthand. This is the story of the lead ship of the last and greatest class of battleships the world would ever see. This is the story of the USS Iowa. Before the Iowa could prove her mettle in the crucible of the Pacific, she was tasked with a mission of unparalleled importance, shrouded in the utmost secrecy. In November 1943, she became the temporary flagship of the free world. Her passenger, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt. The destination, North Africa. The ultimate goal, the Tehran Conference, a historic first meeting with Winston Churchill and Joseph Stalin to chart the course for the end of World War II and the shape of the post-war world. The journey across the U-boat-infested Atlantic was fraught with peril. The Iowa was transformed into a presidential vessel, with a specially installed bathtub for Roosevelt, the only one ever fitted on a U.S. Navy warship. The president, largely confined to a wheelchair, was an immensely valuable and vulnerable target. The entire operation, codenamed Magic Carpet, was a high-stakes gamble. The ship sailed at high speed, part of a formidable task force, but the danger was ever present. The tension was palpable among the crew, who understood the gravity of their charge. A now famous incident nearly brought the mission to a disastrous end. During a training exercise, the destroyer USS William D. Porter, one of Iowa's escorts, accidentally launched a live torpedo directly at the battleship. A frantic warning was sent, and Iowa's captain ordered a hard turn, narrowly avoiding the projectile which detonated in the ship's wake. The incident, a potentially catastrophic friendly fire event, highlighted the razor's edge on which the mission was balanced. After safely delivering the president, the Iowa proved she was more than just a transport. She was a vessel capable of executing the most critical tasks at the highest levels of command, a worthy guardian for the leader of a nation at war. With the president's mission complete, USS Iowa's true purpose began. She steamed for the Pacific, a theater of war defined by vast distances and brutal, island-hopping campaigns. Joining the formidable Fifth Fleet in early 1944, she was thrust immediately into the heart of the action. Her first major combat operation was Operation Flintlock, the invasion of the Marshall Islands. Here, the Iowa's role was twofold. First, her immense anti-aircraft battery, a dense forest of 5-inch, 40mm, and 20mm guns, formed a near impenetrable shield around the fleet's precious aircraft carriers. These carriers were the new queens of the sea, and the battleships, once the fleet's capital ships, were now their ultimate bodyguards. Secondly, her 16-inch guns were unleashed against shore targets for the first time. The atolls of Kwajalein and Eniwetok felt the fury of her main battery, as 2,700-pound armor-piercing shells and 1,900-pound high-capacity shells systematically obliterated Japanese fortifications, bunkers, and coastal defenses. For the gun crews deep within the armored turrets, it was a thunderous, violent, and precise ballet of steel and cordite. Each salvo shook the 887-foot hull to its core, a testament to the unimaginable power being directed at an unseen enemy miles away. During this campaign, she also engaged and sank the Japanese light cruiser Katori, her first naval kill. The Iowa was no longer a pristine symbol. She was a blooded veteran, her decks now stained with the grime of constant operations, her crew hardened by the realities of combat. She had proven her design, validated her purpose, and was now a feared and respected predator in the unforgiving waters of the Central Pacific. By June of 1944, the American war machine was pushing relentlessly toward Japan. The next strategic objective was the Mariana Islands, including Saipan, Tinian, and Guam. Their capture would provide airbases for the new B-29 Superfortress bombers to strike the Japanese home islands. The Japanese Navy, knowing the stakes, committed its remaining carrier strength to a decisive battle, hoping to annihilate the American fleet. The resulting engagement would become known as the Battle of the Philippine Sea, or more famously, the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. The USS Iowa, as part of Vice Admiral Willis Lee's Task Force 58, was at the center of the American defensive screen. Her primary role was to protect the American carriers from waves of Japanese aircraft. On her radar screens, operators watched as hundreds of enemy planes appeared as blips, swarming towards the fleet. This was the moment her anti-aircraft design was truly tested. Iowa's 5-inch dual-purpose guns threw up a barrage of flak at longer ranges, creating a deadly wall of steel splinters. As the attackers drew closer, the 40mm Bofors cannons, firing in rapid 4-round clips, and the 20mm Oerlikon cannons, spitting out a high-volume stream of shells, joined the symphony of destruction. The sky was filled with tracers, flak bursts, and falling planes. For 2 days, the Iowa and her sister ships repelled attack after attack, their combined firepower creating a kill zone from which few Japanese pilots could escape. Over 600 Japanese aircraft were shot down in a stunningly lopsided victory. The Iowa's crew performed flawlessly, their relentless training paying off in a hailstorm of defensive fire. The battle was a catastrophe for Japanese naval aviation, a blow from which it would never recover, and the Iowa had been a key architect of that victory. In October 1944, the war in the Pacific reached its crescendo at the Battle of Leyte Gulf, the largest naval battle in human history. It was a sprawling, chaotic, multi-day engagement that would see the final destruction of the Imperial Japanese Navy as an effective fighting force. The USS Iowa was once again in the thick of it, part of Admiral William Bull Halsey's Third Fleet. The Japanese plan was complex, a desperate gamble involving multiple fleets converging on the American landing forces at Leyte. When Halsey took the bait and chased a decoy fleet of Japanese carriers to the north, he left the vulnerable landing beaches protected by only a small force of escort carriers and destroyers, known as Taffy 3. In a moment of supreme crisis, Taffy 3 found itself facing the main Japanese battle force, including the super battleship Yamato. While the smaller American ships fought with incredible heroism, Halsey raced back south with his battleships, including the Iowa. Though they arrived too late to engage the Yamato directly in what could have been the battleship duel of the century, the Iowa's speed was critical in cutting off and destroying elements of the retreating Japanese fleet. Iowa and her sister ship, New Jersey, were detached at flank speed, over 30 knots, to pursue the enemy. Their 16-inch guns finally spoke in a ship-to-ship engagement, pounding the straggling Japanese cruiser Milwaukee and helping to send it to the bottom. While the dream of a direct confrontation with Yamato never materialized, Leyte Gulf was the Iowa's ultimate vindication. She had screened carriers, chased down enemy fleets, and contributed to a victory so decisive it broke the back of Japanese naval power for good. By 1945, the war had reached Japan's doorstep. The USS Iowa, now the flagship of the Third Fleet under Admiral Halsey, was part of the immense naval armada operating directly off the coast of the home islands. The nature of her mission had changed. With the Japanese fleet all but annihilated, Iowa's primary role shifted from fleet defense to offensive strikes. Her 16-inch guns, designed to pierce the thickest naval armor, were now turned against the industrial heartland of the Japanese Empire. Steaming with impunity just miles offshore, Iowa and her sister ships conducted systematic bombardments of strategic targets. Steel mills in Muroran, industrial centers in Hitachi, all felt the devastating impact of her 2,700-pound shells. The psychological effect on the Japanese population was profound. The presence of these untouchable steel behemoths, methodically destroying their cities from the sea, was a clear sign that the war was lost. But the danger had not passed. Japan's most desperate weapon was now fully unleashed, the kamikaze. These suicide aircraft, piloted by men willing to trade their lives for a chance to damage an American warship, were a constant, terrifying threat. Lookouts on the Iowa scanned the skies relentlessly. The ship's anti-aircraft crews, veterans of the turkey shoot, were on constant high alert. The Iowa endured numerous close calls, with kamikazes crashing into the sea nearby, but her screen of flak and the vigilance of her crew kept her unscathed. She was a silent, imposing witness to the firebombing of Tokyo, seeing the glow of the burning city from miles out at sea, a grim prelude to the final act of the war. In August of 1945, the world was irrevocably changed by two flashes of light over Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The war, which had consumed the globe for 6 long years, was finally over. On September 2, 1945, the USS Iowa sailed into Tokyo Bay, a place that had once been the heart of enemy territory. She was not alone. Alongside her was her sister ship, the USS Missouri, and an awe-inspiring assembly of Allied naval power, a fleet that filled the horizon. The Iowa took up her assigned position, her crew lining the rails, a sea of white uniforms against the gray steel of her superstructure. They were silent witnesses to one of the most significant moments of the 20th century. A short distance away, on the deck of the Missouri, General Douglas MacArthur presided over the formal surrender ceremony. The Japanese delegation, somber and defeated, signed the instrument of surrender, officially ending World War II. For the sailors aboard the Iowa, it was a moment of profound relief, pride, and reflection. They had crossed oceans, endured storms, fought in the largest naval battles in history, and survived the threat of kamikazes. They had seen friends and comrades fall. Now, in the very harbor of their former enemy, they watched the final curtain fall on the conflict that had defined their young lives. The USS Iowa, forged for war, had fulfilled her purpose. Her guns, which had roared in anger across the Pacific, were now silent. She had been a key instrument in achieving this hard-won peace, and her presence in Tokyo Bay was a powerful, symbolic statement of total victory. Her first, and most intense, chapter was now closed. After World War II, the great battleships seemed like relics of a bygone era. The age of the aircraft carrier and the dawn of the nuclear age appeared to render them obsolete. The USS Iowa was decommissioned in 1949 and placed in the reserve fleet, her mighty guns silenced, her decks empty. It seemed her story was over. But a new conflict, smoldering on a distant peninsula, would call the Titan back to service. In 1950, North Korea invaded South Korea, and the United States was once again at war. The mountainous terrain of Korea and the static nature of the front lines created a perfect role for the battleships. Their long-range, precision firepower was an invaluable asset for supporting ground troops. The Iowa was recommissioned in 1951 and sailed for her second war. Off the coast of Korea, she became a floating artillery platform of immense power, earning the nickname, the Gray Ghost of the Korean Coast. Her mission was interdiction and fire support. Directed by spotters on the ground or in aircraft, her 16-inch guns could reach far inland, striking enemy troop concentrations, supply depots, railway lines, and fortified positions with devastating effect. A single salvo could obliterate a target that would require an entire squadron of aircraft to neutralize. For the Marines and soldiers fighting in the hills and valleys of Korea, the sound of the Iowa's guns was a welcome thunder, a sign that help was on the way. She prowled the coastline, from Wonsan to Songjin, a constant threat to the enemy, able to deliver overwhelming firepower at a moment's notice. Her second war was less glorious, less epic than the carrier battles of the Pacific, but it was no less vital. She proved that even in the jet age, the battleship still had a powerful and deadly role to play. The Korean War armistice in 1953 once again brought a quiet peace. For the second time in her career, the USS Iowa's services were no longer required. The strategic landscape was shifting dramatically. The future of naval warfare seemed to belong to nuclear-powered submarines, supersonic jets, and, most importantly, guided missiles. The battleship, with its massive crew requirements and reliance on naval gunfire, was seen by many defense planners as an expensive anachronism. In 1958, the Iowa was decommissioned and returned to the quiet solitude of the mothball fleet in Philadelphia. She was carefully preserved, her guns sealed under metal cocoons, her internal spaces dehumidified to prevent decay. She sat alongside her sisters and other veterans of a past war, a ghost fleet of gray steel. For over 2 decades, she slumbered. The world outside changed. The Cold War escalated, reaching a fever pitch with the Cuban Missile Crisis. The Vietnam War was fought and lost. Technology advanced at a breathtaking pace. Satellites circled the globe, and intercontinental ballistic missiles held the world in a delicate balance of terror. During this long sleep, the battleship's relevance was debated. Proponents argued for their survivability and immense firepower, while detractors pointed to their cost and vulnerability in a modern missile environment. To most, it seemed inevitable that the Iowa and her sisters would eventually face the scrapyard torch, their steel to be recycled into new cars and appliances. Her legacy as a great World War II and Korean War vessel seemed secure, but her future as an active warship appeared to be over for good. In the early 1980s, a dramatic shift in American foreign policy gave the Iowa an unexpected third act. President Ronald Reagan, advocating a policy of peace through strength to confront the Soviet Union, initiated a massive expansion of the U.S. military. A key component of this strategy was the 600-ship Navy, and at the heart of this plan was the reactivation of all 4 Iowa-class battleships. The rationale was compelling. The battleships offered a unique combination of firepower and presence. Their thick armor made them incredibly resilient, and they could carry a weapon that no other surface ship could, the Tomahawk cruise missile. The USS Iowa began a massive modernization process. She was awakened from her long slumber and towed to Avondale Shipyard near New Orleans. There, she was transformed. While her iconic 16-inch guns and classic silhouette remained, she was bristling with new technology. Armored box launchers for 32 Tomahawk missiles were installed, giving her the ability to strike land targets with precision from over 1,000 miles away. Launchers for 16 Harpoon anti-ship missiles gave her a modern, over-the-horizon punch. For close-in defense against enemy missiles, 4 Phalanx close-in weapon systems, radar-guided Gatling guns capable of firing 4,500 rounds per minute, were added. Her electronics, radar, and communication suites were completely updated. When she was recommissioned in 1984, the USS Iowa was a unique hybrid, a World War II behemoth infused with the latest in late Cold War technology. She was a symbol of renewed American resolve, a steel giant reborn for a new era of global confrontation. Recommissioned and rearmed, the USS Iowa embarked on her new mission as a cornerstone of President Reagan's revitalized Navy. Her role was no longer to fight in massive fleet actions, but to project power and show the flag in global hotspots. She was a powerful diplomatic tool, a tangible symbol of American interest in military might that could be moved anywhere in the world. Her deployments took her to the tense waters of Central America, where she patrolled off the coasts of Nicaragua and El Salvador during a period of intense civil unrest and superpower rivalry. Her mere presence was a powerful deterrent, a clear message to the Soviet Union and its allies. She steamed through the Suez Canal and into the Persian Gulf, a region destabilized by the ongoing Iran-Iraq War. During Operation Earnest Will, she provided overwatch for convoys of reflagged Kuwaiti oil tankers, her guns and missiles a shield against potential Iranian attacks. This new life was a world away from the Pacific campaigns of the 1940s. It was a constant state of readiness, a series of high-stakes patrols in a world of proxy wars and geopolitical chess. For the new generation of sailors walking her decks, the Iowa was both a piece of living history and a cutting-edge war machine. They trained relentlessly, drilling for every conceivable scenario, from anti-submarine warfare to missile defense to shore bombardment. The battleship, once thought to be an artifact, had found a new and potent purpose in the complex landscape of the Cold War. She was a guardian of the sea lanes, a symbol of American commitment, and a constant, powerful reminder of the consequences of challenging the United States. On the morning of April 19, 1989, the USS Iowa was conducting a gunnery exercise in the Atlantic, off the coast of Puerto Rico. The mood was one of routine training. But in an instant, that routine was shattered by a catastrophic event that would become the darkest day in the ship's long history. At 9:53 a.m., inside the armored confines of Turret 2, the center gun, a massive explosion tore through the gunhouse. A fireball erupted from the barrel, engulfing the turret. The blast was so powerful it blew the turret's armored doors off their hinges and buckled the steel decks. Inside the turret, 47 sailors were killed instantly. The explosion of nearly 3,000 pounds of propellant powder created an inferno of unimaginable heat and pressure. The ship's damage control teams responded with incredible bravery, flooding the powder magazines to prevent a sympathetic detonation that could have destroyed the entire ship. They fought the fire, risking their own lives to prevent a greater disaster. On the bridge, Captain Fred Mussoli and his crew were stunned. Below decks, the ship was filled with acrid smoke. The joy and pride of serving on the mighty Iowa were replaced by shock, horror, and grief. The news sent a shockwave through the Navy and the nation. How could this happen on a modern warship during a peacetime exercise? The 47 men who died were fathers, sons, and brothers. They were volunteers who had chosen to serve their country on one of its most storied vessels. The tragedy in Turret 2 was not a result of enemy action, but of an accident, a sudden, violent event that left a permanent scar on the ship and all who served in her. The Iowa, a vessel designed for war, had suffered its greatest loss during a time of peace. In the aftermath of the tragedy, the search for answers began. The U.S. Navy launched a massive investigation, determined to find the cause of the explosion that took 47 lives. The initial inquiry, however, became mired in controversy and led to conclusions that would later be proven false. Under immense pressure to find a cause, the Navy's first investigation focused on the theory of a deliberate act of sabotage. They singled out one of the deceased sailors, gunner's mate Clayton Hardwick, baselessly suggesting he may have intentionally caused the explosion as part of a murder-suicide plot. This theory, based on thin evidence and innuendo, was presented to the public and caused immense pain to the Hardwick family and the families of the other victims. It was a stain on the memory of the men who had died serving their country. But the families, along with members of Congress and the media, refused to accept the Navy's initial findings. They pushed for a more thorough, scientific investigation. A second, independent inquiry was conducted by the Government Accountability Office and Sandia National Laboratories. This new investigation took a hard look at the physical evidence, particularly the type of gunpowder being used. The powder bags were old, from the 1930s and 40s, and had been stored improperly. Sandia's scientists conducted extensive testing and concluded that the most probable cause of the explosion was an accidental overram of the powder bags into the gun's breech, causing the highly volatile powder to ignite from friction and pressure. In 1991, the Navy officially reopened its investigation and, faced with the overwhelming scientific evidence, retracted its earlier claims. They apologized to the Hardwick family, admitting there was no evidence of sabotage. The true cause was likely a tragic combination of aging materials, procedural errors, and the inherent dangers of handling massive amounts of propellant. The controversy left a deep wound, a cautionary tale about jumping to conclusions in the face of tragedy. The Turret 2 explosion cast a long shadow over the USS Iowa and the entire battleship program. The tragedy, combined with the rapidly changing geopolitical landscape, sealed their fate. In late 1989, the Berlin Wall fell. The Soviet Union, the adversary the 600-ship Navy was built to confront, was crumbling. The rationale for maintaining these expensive, manpower-intensive vessels was disappearing. With the Cold War ending, the era of massive defense budgets was also coming to a close. The Navy needed to cut costs, and the 4 Iowa-class battleships were an obvious target. The Iowa, with her damaged second turret now permanently sealed, was the first to go. On October 26, 1990, for the third and final time, the USS Iowa was decommissioned. The ceremony was a somber affair, a stark contrast to the triumphant recommissioning just 6 years earlier. The crew, many of whom had served through the 1989 tragedy, lowered the flag for the last time. It was the end of an era. The Iowa's final decommissioning came with a bitter irony. Just a few months later, Operation Desert Storm began. Her sister ships, the Wisconsin and Missouri, played a significant role in the conflict, launching the first Tomahawk missile strikes of the war and pounding Iraqi positions with their 16-inch guns. The Iowa, the lead ship of her class, missed the final act. She was silenced just before her unique capabilities were called upon one last time. As she was towed away to the reserve fleet, her last sunset as an active warship marked the true end of the American battleship era. After her final decommissioning, the USS Iowa joined the National Defense Reserve Fleet in Sassoon Bay, near San Francisco. This ghost fleet was a floating graveyard and a strategic reserve, a collection of retired naval and merchant ships waiting for a final call to service or a trip to the scrapyard. For over a decade, the Iowa sat in the quiet, brackish water, a silent giant among ghosts. The California sun bleached her decks, and layers of rust began to streak her gray hull. Seagulls nested on her superstructure. To the commuters crossing the Benicia Martinez Bridge, she was a mysterious, powerful silhouette, a relic from another time. But she was not entirely forgotten. A dedicated community of veterans who had served on her, naval historians, and battleship enthusiasts began to worry about her fate. As other ships from the Ghost Fleet were towed away to be broken up, the fear grew that the Iowa would meet the same end. The Navy, while required by Congress to maintain 2 battleships on the Naval Vessel Register for potential fire support, eventually struck the Iowa from the list, freeing her for donation as a museum. This sparked a new kind of battle, a fight to save the ship. Several cities, including San Francisco and Vallejo, California, vied for the honor of becoming her permanent home. This was not a simple task. A nonprofit organization had to be formed, a comprehensive plan for her maintenance and operation had to be developed, and millions of dollars had to be raised. The fight for the Iowa was a grassroots effort, fueled by passion and a deep respect for the ship's history and the sacrifices of those who served aboard her. It was a race against time and decay, a determined effort to ensure that the ghost of Sassoon Bay would sail one last time, not to war, but to a new mission of remembrance and education. The battle to save the USS Iowa was long and arduous, but in 2011, the Secretary of the Navy announced the final decision. The historic battleship would be donated to the Pacific Battleship Center, a nonprofit group with a plan to bring her to the port of Los Angeles in San Pedro. The news was met with celebration by veterans and supporters who had worked tirelessly for this moment. But the journey was not yet over. The ship first had to be made ready for her final voyage. She was towed from Sassoon Bay to a dry dock in Richmond, California, for extensive refurbishment. Years of neglect had taken their toll. Her hull had to be cleaned of marine growth and repainted with thousands of gallons of her signature haze gray paint. Her wooden decks were restored, and her interior spaces were cleared and made safe for the public. It was a monumental undertaking, accomplished largely by a dedicated army of volunteers, veterans, skilled tradespeople, and ordinary citizens who gave their time and effort to bring the old warship back to life. In May of 2012, the revitalized USS Iowa was ready. Towed by a seagoing tug, she passed under the Golden Gate Bridge for the first time, a majestic and moving sight. It was her final voyage at sea, a slow, stately procession down the California coast. Crowds gathered at vantage points along the shore to catch a glimpse of the last journey of a Titan. On June 9, 2012, she was carefully guided into her permanent berth in the port of Los Angeles, the main channel of the busiest port in the United States. Her engines were cold, and her guns were silent, but she had arrived at her final port of call. On July 7, 2012, the USS Iowa opened to the public, beginning a new and vital mission. She was no longer a weapon of war, but a floating museum, a classroom, and a memorial. Her purpose was no longer to project power, but to preserve history. Today, she stands as the guardian of the Los Angeles harbor, a testament to a pivotal era in American and world history. Visitors can walk the same teak decks where President Roosevelt once stood, peer into the massive barrels of the 16-inch guns, and stand on the bridge where Admiral Halsey commanded the Third Fleet. They can explore the labyrinth of passages below decks, see the crew's living quarters, the mess halls, and the command centers that once buzzed with the energy of a small city at sea. The ship serves as a powerful educational tool. It tells the story of the technological evolution of warfare, from the great gun duels of World War II to the missile age of the Cold War. It offers a tangible connection to the past, allowing new generations to understand the scale and complexity of the conflicts that shaped their world. But most importantly, the USS Iowa is a memorial. It honors the 70 years of service and the thousands of sailors who called her home. It stands as a permanent tribute to the 47 men who lost their lives in the 1989 tragedy, their names enshrined in a solemn memorial near the now silent turret 2. The volunteers who maintain her, many of them veterans, act as storytellers, sharing personal anecdotes and historical facts, ensuring that the legacy of the ship and her crew is never forgotten. The Iowa's new mission is one of peace, remembrance, and inspiration. The legacy of the USS Iowa is written in steel, spanning half a century of conflict and change. She was born at the zenith of the battleship era, a design perfected just as its dominance was being eclipsed by the aircraft carrier. Yet, she adapted and endured. In World War II, she was the ultimate protector of those carriers, a shield of anti-aircraft fire and a hammer for shore bombardment. She was a witness to the end of that global conflict, a symbol of the victory she helped secure. In Korea, she was reborn as a mobile artillery fortress, the Gray Ghost, whose thunderous voice supported troops in a war far from the grand fleet actions of the Pacific. She proved that overwhelming firepower, precisely delivered, would always have a place on the battlefield. And in the Cold War, she was transformed again, a hybrid of old and new, her classic guns paired with modern cruise missiles. She became a tool of global strategy, a powerful piece on the chessboard of superpower confrontation. Her story is also one of human cost. The tragedy of Turret 2 is an indelible part of her history, a painful reminder of the inherent dangers of military service, even in peacetime. It is a story of loss, of a flawed investigation, and ultimately, of the truth prevailing. The Iowa represents the pinnacle of a certain kind of technology, the ultimate expression of the big gun warship. No nation will ever build her like again. She is a bridge between eras, a vessel that served from the age of FDR to the age of Reagan, a constant presence through a period of unprecedented global transformation. A warship, no matter how powerful, is ultimately an inanimate object of steel and wire. What gives it a soul, what transforms it from a machine into a legend, is its crew. Throughout her 50 years of service, over 50,000 sailors called the USS Iowa home. They were the men who stoked her boilers, aimed her guns, plotted her course, and scrubbed her decks. They were young men from every corner of America, from farms and cities, who came together to form a single, focused crew. They endured the sweltering heat of the Pacific, the freezing cold of the Korean coast, and the monotonous tension of Cold War patrols. They lived in cramped quarters, worked grueling hours, and formed bonds of brotherhood forged in shared experience and a common purpose. They were the ones who faced the kamikazes, who listened for the sonar pings of enemy submarines, who felt the deck shudder with every salvo of the main guns. They were the damage control parties who bravely fought the fire in Turret 2, and they were the shipmates who mourned the 47 who were lost. The story of the Iowa is their story. It is the story of the gunner's mate in the turret, the engineer in the fire room, the cook in the galley, and the lookout on the mast. It is a story of professionalism, of courage, and of sacrifice. Today, when veterans of the Iowa walk her decks as old men, they are not just visiting a museum. They are coming home. They point out the bunk where they slept, the mess deck where they ate, the watch station where they stood for hours on end. The ship is a repository of their memories, a living monument to their service and the service of all who wore the uniform. From the Brooklyn Navy Yard to Tokyo Bay, from the coast of Korea to the waters of the Persian Gulf, and finally, to her peaceful home in the port of Los Angeles, the USS Iowa has carved a singular path through American history. She is the lead ship of her class, the first of the last battleships. She carried a president, fought in 3 wars, and was reborn for a new age of conflict. She endured tragedy and controversy, and was saved from the scrapyard by the dedication of those who refused to let her story end. The USS Iowa is more than a museum. She is a symbol. She represents the industrial power that armed the arsenal of democracy and won the Second World War. She represents the global reach and resolve of the United States during the long twilight struggle of the Cold War. And today, she represents our commitment to remembering the past, to honoring the sacrifices made in the name of freedom, and to educating the generations to come. Her guns are forever silent, her engines are cold, but her story continues to resonate. It is a story of power, of perseverance, of service, and of the enduring bond between a nation and the ships that defend it. She is, and will always be, the USS Iowa, America's battleship.